Okay, so today it's a day to spend on making sure your basics are solid. And that way, as we go into the final, these little things are going to appear in the middle of another problem on the final. So you need to know these basics because of that. That got flipped, final answer 4/6. And then the way I like to reduce that is I like to say that's 2 times 2 over 2 times 3. And as long as you got 2/3 for your answer, I don't think anybody can beat me on speed with that. Like if you're going to show any work, I think that's the fastest way to show it. So if you're ever trying to struggle to reduce something, just factor it. It even fits with my favorite saying, if you can factor it, you should. You factor the 4 into this, factor the 6 into that, they cancel 2/3. Make sense? All right, that's one. Here's another one of the top 20, and it's about clearing fractions. It is such a powerful one that I only have like 7 strategies that I teach kids for the ACT. And one of them is clearing fractions. Of course, one of them is if you can factor it, you should. That's like a big deal. Because if a complicated problem can be factored, guaranteed, that's the secret. But if a complicated problem has fractions in it, you should clear them. And the most common mistake right here is for kids to go, oh, I will just subtract 3 from both sides. Don't. If it has fractions, you should clear them. So, to clear the fractions, it's super easy. Times this side by the 3, times this side by the 3. But be careful that you remember this whole side has to be times by 3. So the way I do it that saves a little time is I just distribute it right away. I go times 3 here and times 3 here. Now, why do I times by 3 in the first place? So that cancels and that cancels. And do you see how easy this is? 2n plus, what is 3 over 3? 1. And that's 6. And now, if you can't solve that, you know, like from there, any kid can solve that that's in high school math. So we made a hard problem into an easy problem. How? Clearing the fractions. So let's see if you can clear the fractions on a different one. 2/3 n, and you might be like, we just did that one. But it's different. Plus 1/8 equals 3. Well, now you can't just multiply by one number. No, but you could multiply by 2 numbers at the same time. Did you know you could do that? Yeah, I'm going to multiply by 3, but I'm also, at the same time, I can save a step by just multiplying by 3 and 8 at the same time. Now, some kids would say, just multiply by 24. I disagree, because then you just want to factor them so that this can happen. So it's better if they're factored. So now I got 8 times 2 is 16n plus 3 equals 3 times 3 is 9 times 8 is 72. And if you can't solve that, you're in the wrong class. Do you get how we had a really complicated problem and all of a sudden it's an easy problem? I know where you're headed. You know what comes after precalc? Calc. Most of you guys are going to take some form of calculus. Unless you're like, oh, math sucks, I want to get out of being in math. And then in that case, you're probably going to take stats, which makes me feel bad for the stats teachers because then they get the kids that weren't motivated enough to take calculus. But anyway, that kind of happens sometimes. So stats is a really good class. It's a really good real world class. But I think if you took pre-calc, you should just take calc next year. You've made it this far. You're at the edge of calculus. Just take high school version of calculus at least. And if you're rocking this class, consider taking the college level calculus class. But this happens in calculus, and they'll have weird fraction problems. And if you can get the fractions out, then they're easy. All right, so a next one is factoring. But you know what? We've done so much factoring lately. There's like 4 factoring problems on the top 20, and you'll probably get them all right. I want to give you something with points, 2, 3. And 3, 7. You should be able to do the distance between them and the midpoint. Now this one doesn't get used in your regular math classes very often, although I know because I taught this class. In honors precalc, they do the distance between points, and they make it way harder than this. So that's in honors precalc. Midpoint, it's mostly on there because the ACT often has midpoint questions on it. So it's good to know this one, but more for the ACT. All right, try doing the distance and the midpoint. And if you're like, no idea what you're talking about, then you're gonna learn something. Again, why else would you care about this? It's probably on the placement test that your college will send you. All right. By now, you either knew the distance formula or you didn't. I'm going to describe it in a way that you'll probably remember instead of just, it's got 16 numbers and letters and signs like positives and negatives that you have to have right. About 16. But my point is it's really long. But if I tell you a story, it might help you remember it better. It's inside a big building. It's like a fight club. And when there's a fight going on, that's obviously a negative thing. I mean, like most of society would say fighting is bad, right? So then the Y's are fighting each other. And notice, I don't care about sub 2s or sub 1s. I'll tell you later why not. I don't care. Just tell me what the both Y's have to be subtracted in any order because we're going to square it. And from here, if I told you that, well, there's only one logical thing to put in here, and this thing has perfect symmetry, then you probably know that these have to be the X's that are fighting. And there has to be something in between them, and I'll just tell you that there's only one plus sign in the whole formula. It's right there. So there is the distance formula. Be honest, how many of you knew that? One kid had it memorized, nice work. Okay, if you didn't have it memorized, that one kid, she had a big advantage over you on the ACT because she could do this problem in like 2 seconds. Because if you know this formula, let me just show you how you use it quick. Here's my two X's, and this is why I said I don't care if it's 2 minus 3 or if I did 3 minus 2. You can do it in either order because you're going to square it. You're either going to get 1 or a negative 1, and if you're going to square it, it doesn't matter. See how it just subtract the X's in any order? It's kind of cool. And then the Y's are these numbers, the 3 and the 7, and since I get a choice on how to subtract it, just do it the easy way. 7 minus 3. Sure, you could have done it the other way, get negative 4, but you're going to square it anyway. All right, so can you do the rest in your head? 4 squared is 16, plus 1 squared is 1, so the answer is the square root of 17. That's how far it is between those 2 points. All right. That's called the distance formula. The next one is called the midpoint formula. It's to find the spot in exactly between 2 points. In the real world, this actually happens. If you're trying to find a spot that's actually between this city and you know exactly where to stop, I can tell you an example. I drove to Banff, which is way in northern Canada, and I wanted to stop somewhere along the way. I wanted to figure out what was exactly halfway. And so I stopped at a city exactly halfway along the route so that I could sleep overnight there and then continue on with the trip. All right. If you want to know, the city that is exactly halfway between here and Banff is called Regina. That's how they say it. So anyway, that's the halfway mark. All right. So anyway, I'm going to say if these are my 2 points and they are 2, 3, and 3, 7. The midpoint between them is just the average of your x's. 3 plus 2 is 5 over 2. That's what you do to average something. Comma, the average of the y's. And 7 plus 3 is 10 divided by 2 is 5. So this is 5 halves, which is 5 divided by a half, which is 2.5. Comma, that's 10 divided by 2, which is 5. That's how you do a midpoint. One more reason to care. If you're going to take the ACT, it's The ACT would have this on there. Not for sure, but it's definitely been on there before, and it's one of the topics. And why would you take the ACT? I think a lot of kids nowadays are like, well, you don't have to take the ACT, so I don't want to take the ACT, so I'm not going to take the ACT, and that's fine. But my daughter, for example, took the ACT, got a good enough score, she got into the college she wanted, but then they have this chart on their website that says, if you have a higher ACT, we're going to give you a cheaper price. At NDSU, North Dakota State University, NDSU, they have this scholarship where if you can get like a 32 ACT, they'll cut a big chunk of your price off, like thousands and thousands of dollars. So my daughter took a class and she ended up getting a better ACT, which in turn led to a scholarship at NDSU that was worth $3,000. Like, that's like a whole summer worth of work. And she just got a better ACT score. And there's other schools that do that too. If you're interested at all in St. Thomas has a little calculator right on their website that says, type in your GPA, type in your ACT score, type in your a few other little questions they ask you, and we'll tell you what your tuition would be here. And it told you, and then try it again, act like you're a different kid with a higher ACT. The price is cheaper. My daughter with that higher ACT score applied there. She was offered a $25,000 per year scholarship at St. Thomas. They would cut her price, $25,000 per year, times 4 is $100,000. That's enough to buy a small house in a different part of the country. North Carolina, you can get houses for $100,000. All because she had a higher ACT score. So anyway, if you're like, I'm not taking the ACT, well, maybe you should, because maybe you get a scholarship out of it. All right, so that's called midpoint, and 38% of the ACT is geometry like this. 38%. That's almost 40%. That's almost half the ACT. And you haven't had geometry in a long time. Okay, so let's see if you learned anything. 2,5 and 3,10. Would you please tell me the distance? Remember, it's a fight club. And the midpoint between those 2 points. I'll pause for a second and give it a try. Okay, let's see if you got distance and midpoint down. Distance. It's a fight club. The X's are fighting. And it's squared up. Did you remember to square it? And then the Y's are fighting. And that's also squared up. It has to do with a squared plus b squared equals c squared. And you can do it that way, but it's just way slower. So here's the X numbers, 3 and 2. The smart way to subtract them, 3 minus 2. Could have done it either way. The Y's, to subtract them, you got 10 minus 5. That's the easy way. Again, if you did it reversed, but you're going to square it, it wouldn't matter. 3 minus 2 is 1 squared is 1. So square root of this part is 1 plus 10 minus 5 is 5. 5 squared is 25, so that's 25. So did you have square root of 26? Raise your hand if you had that right. Yay, that's more than half the class. Okay, the midpoint. The midpoint is the average of these two. So 3 plus 2 is 5. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. Do you get what I did there? I did 3 plus the 2 divided by 2. And for the other part of it, I go 10 plus 5 divided by 2. That's 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. I'm totally okay with 15 over 2 and 5 over 2. There's your midpoint. Okay, so I think that's enough practice. Now we'll see with a little bit of practice where you're at on the top 20, these top 20 things, if I can get you to master them. If you are at 19 or 20 out of 20. I think I've only had 2 students in my entire teaching career who had an A on this quiz, got themselves to an A after practice, who didn't get an A in my class. Like only 2 kids over a long time. So if you can get yourself to an A on this, you'll probably have an A in this class. All right? It's the basics. It's math. Math's all about. All right, so that's what we're doing today is the Schoology quiz. You'll find it if you go look right now in Schoology. It's at the very bottom of my page. I'm going to walk, oh, it might be disabled. I got to get that going. But that's what we did, end of the video for today.